We all take days when we're sick. For our kids who are challenging with mental health, it's okay to take a mental health day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
I've probably said this before about a different song.
Okay.
Producer James, that's a perfect intro. Like if I had to pick one intro to our podcast, it would be that one. Because it's not silly.
It's not silly.
But it's positive and happy.
It is happy.
And parenting.
You like happy.
I do.
Like happy
I do
music.
like happy. I'm an Enneagram 7, if anybody pays any attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
You take all that stuff with a grain of salt, right? But
the experience of the music makes you feel good.
Yeah, the aspect of being an Enneagram 7 is there's no bad days.
Yeah,
only happy things. And so that's why a song like that.
And you'll try everything at least once.
I'll try everything at least once.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Producer James in the house for episode 3.
Yay.
Our third episode without producer Chris.
I know.
We miss producer Chris.
We appreciate him so much. And we're thankful for producer James, who's
Filling
also a
in.
pastor.
Pastor, producer.
Yes.
Podcast guru.
Yes. James.
PB.
Well,
PBJ.
I don't know about that. James, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my guest.
I'm going to do some severe editing.
Yes, you're gonna have to.
He does have the power.
But everybody, thanks as always, Kurt Johnston, Grace Yoon, On Purpose Parents Podcast, where we try to give a little hope and help, some practical ideas. We want our podcast to be super duper practical and have you walk away with maybe some tangible action steps, but we try not to be overly prescriptive because everybody's journey is different. And this is our third episode on a subject that is hard to be prescriptive, and we don't want to be prescriptive when we're talking about mental health with our kids because, as Amy said last episode, if you've met one child with mental health challenges, you've met one child with mental, and there is no prescriptive way to deal with all this because everything is so nuanced and there's so much variety in our children. And then when we add to that children who have some mental health diagnoses, is that the right word? That's plural?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
What's that?
Diagnoses.
Diagnoses, is that it? Thank you, producer James. Producer James.
Pulling through.
He's earning his paycheck. Thank you. What was it again?
Diagnoses.
Diagnoses. Thank you. Yeah. You can tell I'm an Enneagram 7 because I'm joking around a serious conversation that we're having about.
But you know what? You gotta have humor in it.
Thank you,
have
Amy.
to.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this series, this conversation, we just wanted to kind of bring it home with a couple questions for you, Amy. And here's the thing: we know that even in 3 episodes, we have not touched every topic, which is why we're happy that Amy's willing to give out her email address, amyk@saddleback.com. If you're a parent or you're a friend, and you go, I have some specific questions. I need some very practical, tangible help. Email Amy with a more specific situation or question, and she'll point you. If she doesn't know how to help you, she'll point you to people who can. But we hope that this little series has been encouraging. Maybe you've learned a little bit. Maybe we've just served to help parents go, okay, I'm going to get through this.
You're not alone.
It's challenging. I'm not alone. I'm going to get through it. And here's a little bit of practical help.
Yeah, exactly.
Specifically, email Amy K, and she will send you a link to how many of those videos do we have?
Well, we have broken down into we have our ones that are truly just mental health, and then we have some tough stuff ones, but I think we have over 30, and we have them, but we also, all the mental health ones are actually on YouTube also under our parenting, our Saddleback Parents website.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all those, we have those videos there as well.
There you go. And
That's
those are
awesome.
very, very highly pragmatic, highly practical. So very, very helpful.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
let's
your
jump
tips.
into our topic.
Yeah, and one of the things you talked about last episode, Amy, was that we were talking about the question of self-care, and you mentioned that it's really important that parents don't isolate and they stay within community. But sometimes being in community with a child with mental health challenges can be a challenge. because not everybody understands what you're going through. You might even not really be understanding what you're going through. And creating that supportive environment for yourself as a parent, but also your child can be a tricky thing that our parents are navigating through. So could you share maybe some practical tips or effective strategies of how you can educate your friends or your kids' friends or teachers or community members about childhood mental health, and how do you even start having these conversations?
I think it starts just by being honest. I think as a whole, we tend to put on a pretty face and like everything's great. And so I think sometimes is letting people in. I am the worst at asking for help. If anyone who knows me here at church, they all will attest for that. And so I think it's, again, like a self-care, being willing to go out there and just share with, you may be sharing with friends and, sit down and be like, hey, I just want to share with you that these are some challenges, things I'm going through. And there may be times that I may cancel on you last minute, or there may be times that I don't return a text, or maybe when you call, I don't call back for a week, and whatever it is, but let them know, like, these are some things I'm going through, and to be real. And I think that's hard. On this flip side of school, because I think the school is a really important one to talk about, is that I think so often as parents, we think that doesn't have a place in school. Like, school is only if you have a learning disability, or if you have even a physical impairment or like that. But having help at school when you have a mental health thing is very important. Something our parents can do is, if people are aware, is for individuals who have disabilities, they have something called a 504 plan. But for a lot of time, for the more on the mental health side, there's something called it's IEP if you have more of the true disabilities. The 504 plan is for mental health. And so my son, who struggles with mental health, he had a 504 plan. And what a 504 plan is where the IEP for individuals with disabilities is really goal setting. The 504 is more about creating some dynamics of some how we can do things a little differently. And so for like my son, he got to have 2 extra days on homework. And so in his 504, it said he got 2 extra days on homework. So when he came home and was extremely distraught and having a difficult day and his anxiety was through the roof, we could say, you know what, we're just going to put a hold on this and we're going to go do something else. And we're not going to worry about it because we got 2 days. And so his teachers knew that. He could have extra time on a test. If tests were like brought up all this anxiety in him or whatever, he could have extra time to finish a test. It wasn't like you have to do it before class is over. He could come back at lunch or whatever. And so 504s are really important in engaging with your teachers. And so any parent can get it. They just talk to the school and say, we want to look at getting a 504 for our son. They
And then
do.
a 504 is uniquely created and crafted for your child.
Specifically
Okay.
for your child. And so, my son got an extra set of books so he could have books at school and books at home, because he would freak out if he forgot a book and then he couldn't do his homework. And then so it set off his things.
Is that true in every state, or is that a California thing?
No, I believe it's nationally. Yeah. So it's a national thing so that you can get 504s. And so it's across the board. And so you can go to different states. They may not call it 504 maybe, but there is accommodations. That's the word I was looking for, accommodations.
And they would just go to the principal, or the administrative office
Go to
at the
school,
school.
and the school psychologist would help them through it. And that you would ask, you do need to have a set diagnosis. You can't go, oh, I think my child has this. So they need to have that a diagnosis. A lot of it is ADHD, but it doesn't mean it can't be something else. Like my son was always late for school, and it was because he has OCD, and so he always had to make sure the lights were turned off. He had to make sure the doors were locked, and so they gave him accommodations for being late. I mean, there's just certain things now, and so those are really important. So I think being able to advocate for your child, and I think for those who have children that are a little bit older, is when you're advocating, teaching your child what it looks like to be an advocate. And so it means like, hey, so I'm going to be doing this with your teacher, but I need you to do this. So I'm going to go talk to your teacher and let them know that we had a difficult night or whatever, but I need you to ask them how to do this assignment, because I can't, you need to go and find out how to do this. And so really teaching our children what advocating looks like for themselves, because, some kids may be embarrassed. Some kids don't want to, some kids rely completely on our parents. And so I think the greatest thing we can do is, as we're advocating for our children, is teaching our children what it looks like to advocate for themselves. Because my son's now in college and I can't go talk to his teacher.
Right.
I can't go
Right.
talk to his professor.
Right.
He has to go talk to his professor.
Right.
And so the greatest thing we can do is empower our kids to be able to empower themselves.
Right. Which is, again, parenting 101, right? I mean, we would say
Right.
that about any parent raising a child is, look, I can't fight every battle for you. I
Right.
can't speak up for every need. I'm not with you 24/7. We've got to help you learn to advocate for yourself. It just looks a little bit different, and is probably safe to say in a lot of ways more important that we're thinking that through with our children who are navigating some mental health challenges.
Right. To really empower them, especially when there may not be like other kids or students or friends asking for the same kind of clarification or help, that it really, you do need that encouragement that it's okay. Ultimately, it's kind of like what you were saying. It's not bad. It's just, you may need help in a different way, and you can ask for that help in a different way. Like, I didn't understand it when you just zip through it like 10
Right.
minutes for the lesson for everybody else. Maybe I need it explained to me a little bit more methodical, or whatever the need might be, but to just enter that mindset that it's okay to learn things differently too, and to process things differently, and to ask for that help.
And, it's okay to take mental health days. We all take days when we're sick. For our kids who are challenging with mental health, it's okay to take a mental health day. We're going to take a day. And, there were days that I literally would drive my son to school, and he would be out of his mind for the day and really struggling. And I would just say, do we need to take a mental health day? And he'd be like, yep. And I'd be like, okay, here we go. Off we go. And we go back home. And so again, like we talked about before, we have to look at not abusing those things.
Right.
Right.
But having some time to do that. Also, you were asking, like, I think it's okay to set up our family of things we can and can't talk about with our student or child who has a mental health, And so equipping our family members, equipping our friends that, there may be things that are sensitive for them to talk about.
Right.
This, we're not going to talk about, unfortunately in this day and age, we have individuals who have suicidal ideations. And so it may be comfortable for us to talk to our child about it, and it's important for that to be comfortable, but it may not be something comfortable for someone else. But at the same time, we also want to be aware that if our child who has suicidal ideations maybe spends the night at a grandparent's house, we want that house to be safe. So it's okay, it's okay to sit down and equip our family members, our friends, of how we engage with our child. But at the same time, we want our child to still be just a child,
Right.
and so have those things. And so, but I think there are a lot of different ways we can go about it. But I think as much to make them feel typical and quote unquote normal, but at the same time, there may be some sensitivities that they may have around what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
I have a quick follow-up question on the 5 or 4 plans you were saying. Does that go all the way through like senior year?
Yeah.
Like, so does it change each year then? Does it get refreshed?
So it's every year, once a year you get together, you'll have a certain date that when it starts, and that'll be, so if you go in, say 3rd grade, and you get 2 months in and you're like, oh, my child really needs something, that'll be your date going forward.
Okay.
And so you'll go in every year, you'll meet with the school psychologist here in California. I'll clarify, James, I'm not 100% sure in other states, but here in California, meet with a school psychologist. And then the teachers are invited as well. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. And you sit down together and you come up with accommodations of things. My son, being sensory, he was allowed to raise his hand and say, I'll be right back. And he could walk around the classroom because if you think about it, so much of what we do in school is sitting. And we sit and we sit, and then we go on recess, and then we sit and we sit. And for a lot of our kids, that's too much. And so he could have a sensory break, and so he could get up and move around. And so for some of our students, they have a difficult time writing. Writing may be really difficult where they're more verbal processors. And so he could answer questions, and I was the one who'd write or type it out. And so I was allowed to do it. And so there's, a multitude of accommodations that can be set for individuals with the 504 plan. And so that was the greatest thing. And so, every year, and then you'd have triennials. Every 3 years, you'd have a bigger one.
Okay.
And then once they turn 18, you're not invited. And so my son turned 18 when he was a senior. So I wasn't invited. He allowed me to come. But your child doesn't have to have you there at 18.
Oh, interesting.
And then they do actually look at 504 plans. You can move them on to the school, and there are accommodations that each school in college. So my son's in college, and he does have some accommodations that he can do in college as well. So there are some things
that can continue.
Yeah, they continue on, but they don't look at that exact one. They do look at like, oh, you did have a 504 or an IEP, and so it can continue on.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That
That's
is
awesome.
really great.
We kind of stumbled upon a little bit of a conversation before we started recording. That I thought, ooh, let's maybe touch on that for a minute if we kind of wrap up this whole conversation. And we were talking a little bit with producer James and you, Amy, about the role of popular culture and media and the influence that it has on this conversation, and how do we help our kids navigate all of that?
Yeah, it's so individualized, and I'm sure all of us can attest that we know some kids who are in third grade with a cell phone and are on social media, and then we know some people who are juniors in high school and their parents have still told them they can't be on social media. And so I'll be really honest, I would love to say this is what you do, but I mean, it has to be what works for your family. I definitely think, social media can be really scary nowadays, and what's out there and what's happening. And so I think it's okay to have conversations about it, to be open, to, know that at any time I can pick up your phone and look on your phone for us. For us, that's worked for my family, because otherwise I'm not aware. And as we know, Snapchat is out there, and things that they write can disappear. And we know that there's goods and bads and everything.
Yeah. Is it safe to say that there's like a plus and a minus, a yin and a yang, whatever, the two sides of the coin, whatever you want to, of the fact that on the one hand, the media and society and our culture and celebrities talking more about and normalizing mental health challenges and their own struggles and their own diagnoses is been really good, because it has made it more normalized.
Less stigma.
It's less stigma. Then the flip side is, if we're not careful, and maybe this is accurate, maybe it's not, it almost can become not trendy, but teenagers maybe they're quick to say, oh, they self-diagnose.
There could be a lot of misinformation. Right?
They can, in some ways, leverage, hey, my friend has a 504, and so I'm going to say that I've got OCD too, because I want to be able to, whatever the accommodation has been made for their friend. And so is there good and bad, and help parents briefly navigate like the positives of it being more normalized and more a part of our cultural norm, and maybe some of the downsides to that if we're not careful, because information's everywhere.
Yeah.
Self-diagnosis can be everywhere. There's blogs everywhere. There's TikToks everywhere. There's celebrities.
Right.
And
Well, specifically, producer James was saying before the podcast started is that there might be a trend, or that there was a trend on like TikTok too, where being a diagnosed ADHD was like a cool thing, or could be seen as a trendy thing. And so you might have kids that are looking at these TikTok videos and then saying, well, I think I have ADHD. And then what do you do if your child comes to you and says, I saw this TikTok and I have this?
And which, by the way, could be a positive.
Right.
Because it's possible that that's the first time that
they can
teenager
relate.
could relate and go, oh, that's me. I've always wondered. So there's
how do you navigate that? It's very
all
complex.
that?
Well, I think...
Teach us, Amy.
Yes. Give us your wisdom.
Solve this for us, Amy.
I think if anyone's ever had a teenager, specifically teenagers, and also I'm younger, our tweens, is they want to fit in.
Yeah.
And so if everyone's getting a diagnosis, we want to get a diagnosis also. And I know that sounds really silly, but the reality is our teenagers don't look at it as like, I think, to go back, I think my son would laugh at people wanting to get a diagnosis because he has them, and he would be like, I wouldn't, give anyone the things I have to struggle with.
Right.
But the reality is you get a little more attention. I think ultimately, if you have a child who self-diagnoses and it's like that, you don't want to take it lightly. I think you really want to sit down and discuss it and say, well, why do you think that? Where is this information coming from? You know, how does that fit into your life? Like, get a chance. And then I think you need to go to a medical professional and say, you know what, if that's something you're really seeing, then I think we need to get someone outside our family, outside of our circle of friends, to see if that's true. And there really are, you know, and to go see your general practitioner, to go see a licensed therapist, whatever it is, and to see if that does fit for them. And so that way you're getting the truest of diagnosis, because some individuals with ADHD may need meds, and we don't want to self-medicate someone who we don't. I mean, granted, you can't get meds and just pick them up, but you don't want to self-medicate. And so I think there really is having those conversations. Again, we'll go back to parenting 101, is having that conversation. You know, what would it look like if you did have ADHD?
Yep.
You know, asking some of those questions. So, you know, what made you think that you possibly had ADHD? Asking those questions, and really, again, the open-ended, not the yes and no's, where they really have to share and do it and say, how would it feel if you had it?
Yeah.
You know, would you feel like that made you feel like you finally realized what's going on, or is that because maybe, you know, your friend Mary got diagnosis, and then does that seem like that'd be something that fit for you, or just really having those conversations, but ultimately finding a medical professional that could truly get that diagnosis.
Yeah, that's good.
That's really good. Yeah.
Well, man, as we wrap up this series, Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so
My
much.
mind's just full of like little. As we wrap it up, I'm going, okay, what are just a few practical highlights that we might remind parents? And so you guys can chime in, but a couple that hop out is the reminder that for those of us who are followers of Jesus, a weakness is a witness. Like God can use our challenges to point people to him. And that, you know, in the Bible says, in our weaknesses, he is strong, right? So it's our weakness can be a witness. Just because I'm different doesn't mean I'm defective. Your limitations don't have to limit you. Ask for help. There are resources.
Yes,
there are resources out there that you may not be aware of. The 504, for instance, you know, for us, obviously we don't, but there's stuff out there that maybe you think you've exhausted your resources, but ask again.
Yeah.
Ask somebody different.
I think also one thing to chime in, and we haven't talked about it all, is you haven't done anything wrong. Parents, you haven't done something wrong.
Right.
I think we look at it and we want to say, like, what did we do wrong? We want to think first, we go, what did we eat while we were pregnant? And we do all these things. Or did we do this when they were a child? Did we not coddle them enough? Did we call them too much? And we do all this what ifs. And the reality is we know that mental health as a whole has nothing to do with what we've done. The reality is it's who these children are.
Right.
And so when we can get to that place and, like, you know what, this is who they are, and I'm going to come in and help them there and make it not about me, because I think we can do that sometimes.
Yeah.
Well,
that's really good.
That's a good one to end on.
There you go.
Everybody, thanks so much for listening. Email Amy Kendall, amyk@saddleback.com if you'd like to get some more specific insights and help and encouragement. You can watch our last episode right here somewhere. You can subscribe down here. I'm just pointing where producer Chris has told me to point.
I think it was here and here.
So thanks for joining us. And our next episode will drop again next Wednesday, as they always do.
Yep.
Like, subscribe, share it with a friend. We sure do appreciate all of you. Thanks for joining us.
We love you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thanks,
Amy.
Amy.
Thank
Thanks,
you, James.
James.